I believe your question was about the fractures. The fractures, some of them, are you talking about to the ribs or to the head? I don't know the exact number, but the ribs, let me talk about the ribs. The ribs were healing, so we know that takes it outside of the days that Ruben Ebron would have had custody of Lonzie Barton, because he was in the custody of his father and other adults that were basically, you know, transporting him and all of those things. And we also know that he had been seen by a medical doctor at or around that time, some weeks before, for falling down some stairs. So the fractures to the ribs aren't really that compelling as it relates to any sort of charges that we could have gone forward on Ruben Ebron. And as far as the skull fractures, it's what Chief Hackney was referring to, which are called perimortem. And in a situation that we have in this particular case is that Lonzie, the way he was found and the bones that were found, he was left out there for months and months. So perimortem is at or near the time of death, but it could extend weeks after his death because of the decomposition as it relates to his body. So there's no way to really date or time those fractures to say that it was before his death. It's sometime at or near or some weeks after because of animal activity, because of the condition that his body was left in. So that's why the fractures aren't really that compelling to say that Ruben Ebron was responsible for them.
London, it sounds like, if I'm interpreting all that right, that the fractures don't lead to evidence that there were previous physical abuse.
Correct. We can't rule it out. We can't. It's a very it's an extended period of time because of the way he was left out there. If we had gotten to him soon after that, then yes, those would be more compelling, and the medical experts that examine that, they could give us more answers. But because we're examining bones of a child 7 months later, they can only guess, and because they don't know the rate of decomposition and the elements that he was left in, and we know that there was scavenger activity on his body and the weight of the tires, we just don't know how those impacted those fractures.
For prosecutors or investigators, we don't have the cause of death, we have what we have. Are you willing to fully accept and embrace the fact that this was a tragic accident? Is that what you're able to say?
Well, I think that in many of these cases, we have to accept that we can't prove otherwise, and that's our limitation. I would invite you all to go out to the Florida Supreme Court website and pull up a case that the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office and I handled many years ago, Andrew Lukehart. It is the one case that I can think of where we did find the baby's body within 48 hours, where the defendant, the boyfriend of the mother who had this precious baby, led us to the body. We recovered the body. I still have a vivid memory of Dr. Aruza walking out of a lake holding that baby's body. And that is the way a crime can be investigated and prosecuted when there is immediate cooperation and immediate finding. Going back to the question you asked earlier, Ann, about had this baby been found earlier, would there have been a different result? Possibly, but we'll never know. So we deal with the facts and the laws we have them. But in that one case, in the Lukehart case, and because he was on probation for hurting another baby, we were able to seek the death penalty on him, and he remains on death row to this day. But therein lies the difference and the reason why every case has to be taken on its individual facts and the laws that apply. So that's the difference. Is there anybody truly in the city who thinks that this team of police officers and prosecutors wouldn't want the maximum penalty on Lonzie Barton's killers? Obviously we do, but we are bound by the Constitution and the laws of the state of Florida, and all the grandstanding in the world doesn't change that. Yes, Ann. Well, Lee, do you want to address that? That's been another difficulty in this case, Ann.
Well, and I just want to reiterate on going back to your earlier question about, is this enough time? Is 20 years enough time for this case? the people of this city elected Ms. Corey and Sheriff Williams to make tough decisions. And they appointed some of us and put a team in place of people to make decisions and help them make the ultimate decisions in this case. And the ultimate decision was we needed to bring that child home. That child needed to be brought out of the darkness and given a proper burial. His family, those loved ones in Baker County, his grandmother, those are the people who we were thinking about when this decision was made. The entire community needed to have this child brought and given a proper burial. And because of the decision that was made, because of the plea agreement that was reached, Lonzie Barton no longer lays under some random tires in a wooded area of darkness.
Chief Hackney, has Lana Barton met with investigators since these new facts came out, and what has her reaction been to knowing what you guys now know in this case?
Again, go back to what Mr. Manti said with other things that may be facing Lana. I don't want to go into details about that portion of it. I don't think that would benefit the future proceedings or any future proceedings she's facing either here or in Baker County. I just don't.
Say Lana lied to you in any way when she pleaded guilty, she cooperated, she took a deposition. Did she not tell the truth or withhold information when she did that?
It's hard to say when she did that. You know, you have to take some things at face value. But I can tell you that both of these individuals, from the very second that they came in contact with the sheriff's office, Lana in the circumstances where she encountered the officers on the way home from work, and Ruben when he made his 911 call, both started down a long road of lies. So they're liars in my eyes. You have to take what they're offering in these plea agreements at face value, just because of that's the way that this works.
So did Ebron have strategically waited to reveal where the body was to reveal the cause of death?
I mean, could have done a lot of things. Ultimately, that is what happened. I mean, his delaying cooperation in finding him did have an impact on the forensic outcome of the remains. Whether that was his intent or what he was trying to do, he was a liar from the get-go, like I just said. Who knows?
But I can tell you, I'm sorry, I can tell you that our prosecutors made very clear within the bounds, the four corners of that plea agreement, that if he lied in his proffer, which was sworn testimony, which would subject him to perjury, that if he lied about what happened to that baby, we would still be able to prosecute him, and we additionally would have perjury charges. They were very careful about that.
Is that same put in Lana's agreement? I'm curious.
No, Lana's agreement happened before Ebron's, yeah.
Obviously, it appears as though she withheld some information on what she told you then.
She did, but she, my understanding was pled to the cap that was the maximum for the statute with which she was charged.
So that language that was included in Mr. Ebron's plea was not included?
No, this was included as part of not knowing whether we were actually going to even be able to find that baby's body, but as part of the deal that he would have to tell us what happened to the baby and lead us, and it was based not just on him telling us where the body was, but us actually recovering the body. So like I said, we were very deliberate and very careful in the way we crafted this plea agreement. And it might not have been signed. We went right up until the last minute.
Did Lana even indicate, in those conversations to get to an agreeable document in her initial plea, that she had foreknowledge or any indication that she knew about the body where it would be?
No. And in fact, when you look back at the investigation, you'll see there were conversations where she kept telling him, tell me where the baby is. Not in those words, but she kept saying that.
So, Ms. Corey, if Lana Barton comes forward with new information that may contradict his sworn testimony, how do you guys determine who's more reliable, since from the beginning they both lied? You
just summarized better than I could have the problem with these cases when they're both lying and it's a finger-pointing contest like these cases tend to be. What pulls us out, what saves law enforcement and prosecution, are the physical findings that refute what either or both are saying. We did not have that in this case. There was not a shred of tissue left on this child's remains that could be analyzed for the types of things you're asking, for the drugs that you asked about, Larry, for the injuries to the skull. There's no brain to examine. So when we have statements, those are tested by and compared to an expert's findings. And as we've said multiple times, the expert's findings in this case cannot help us.
What do you say to people who would express concern that, and I think if your detectives were so vigorous in questioning all along the way, that their intransigence helped them in the end get a lesser sentence?
You know, and I think that happens in a lot of cases where people run and hide from the police and the case gets cold. We're still, as you know, prosecuting hundreds of cold case murders and rapes and other types of cases where the lapse of time inures to the benefit of the defendant, but we never stop trying. We never give up, and we always try to prove, and we will always continue to try to prove the highest charge possible. It's our duty under the laws to file and charge the highest crime that we believe we can prove beyond a reasonable doubt, and that is the key to this. And that is the answer to the critics who say, oh, you should just, throw those charges out there and see what sticks. And it's ironic in light of the many allegations we've heard in past cases about overcharging. And I think what it boils down to is people who want to find fault are going to find fault, but they really ought to have facts and law to back them up when they're attempting to find fault with any particular case.
So, Ms. Corey, what about aggravated manslaughter for Lana Barton? If Ruben's story is true, then she shares the same guilt.
That's just a lot more difficult because we will be reviewing, again, the impact of his sworn testimony compared to what we can prove, but I don't believe we're going to be able to do much more than we have done. Does not mean we won't be seeking to work with other law enforcement authorities who do have other pending charges. And I think the Sheriff's Office has been working and cooperating with Baker County in other charges.
So fair to say in this case, though, Lana Barton would not be facing more charges in terms of Lana's case?
Not at this time.
What's your concern? I mean, based on sort of what we've heard of the analysis of that night and the time frame.
It still ends up in a finger-pointing contest between two people who have lied. When you put someone on the stand, and it's our dilemma with all co-defendant cases. It's one of the reasons our Sheriff's Office has such difficulty when there's more than one shooter or two shooters and a non-shooter, and you catch one before the other. Who do you use as your star witness? So. Right, but his own testimony describes in detail how the child accidentally drowned. There is physical evidence to corroborate that he took the child into the bedroom to perform life-saving efforts. So there is some corroboration for his testimony, but it does not implicate Lana Barton as having done this, and then he just came in at the last minute to rescue this child.
In the agreement, requirement for Lana to testify against Ebron, was Ebron testifying against Lana part of his agreement?
Testifying truthfully was what was in his agreement.
And why not go for more of an indictment for Mr. Ebron?
I'm sorry.
He would sort of throw Lana under the bus as she did him.
I think you've again summarized what we all would love to say is they've been throwing each other under the bus from the beginning. Whether or not that shakes out into solid proof beyond a reasonable doubt using one of these two as a credible witness. Remember, witness credibility has 10 instructions, 10 separate instructions that a judge can give to the jury about the credibility of a witness. One is, was there a benefit received? Is it consistent with the other testimony? So putting either one of them on the stand against the other was going to be very difficult. What the advantage to us in using Lana as a witness against Ruben is he's the one who hid the child. He's the one who called the police and made up the story about the child being taken from the car and that sort of thing.
Ms. Corey, was there a goal discussed or not discussed with getting Lana Barton to plead out and testify against him to try to get him to crack?
I wouldn't say, we knew that that was a possibility, that if he saw that she pled something, and that was a trigger. It was a triggering event. But on the Sunday evening, I was driving back here from Orlando, and my prosecutors called me and said, you need to get down here right away. We were expecting to go to trial. They were expecting to pick a jury the next morning. The defense had tried to engage in some plea negotiations. They did not work out in the days before. And then that Sunday evening was when we finally, after a lot of deliberation, made the decision to enter into this plea agreement. We all got into the cars and went out there, and we knew in our hearts at that night that he led us to an area where this child probably never would have been found. And then, of course, as you all know, the child was found the next day through the great efforts of the sheriff's office. So.
You mentioned the defense had tried to enter plea negotiations. Was there no desire to plead out those other 3 charges unless there was a body that was led to?
The other charges being the
3.
escape charges? Oh, those charges.
Yeah. What's now counts 2, 3, and 4?
Oh, we had turned down a previous plea bargain, which of course we can't run to you and tell you about when we have charges pending. So.
Is that because there was no body?
Correct. We would have already had this trial, a jury trial, had he not led us to the body. That was the only reason we engaged in a plea bargain with him.
You mentioned earlier that he led you essentially to an area where you likely would have never found the body. And I'm just curious, for our viewers, sort of why. I mean, the search effort was so extensive. I mean, and I think a lot of people were shocked you didn't find it.
Yeah.
There's so much work.
Well, again, and I said this during the time, that we were looking in areas that were specific, and we had information that led us. That wasn't a willy-nilly, we just, hey, this looks like a decent area, we'll go there. You know, we use technology to our best advantage that put us in certain areas. The technology that we used, and even kind of stretching that to a location a little bit more, and then, you know what, maybe just go a little bit more from there. We were still a good mile or more from the Bayard area, where had no reason to believe, based on information, that he would have made it in the times that we had. We had a timetable that we were working off of, and we had the technology that we were using, and I don't want to go more into that, but that led us to that area, and it just didn't lead us far enough. And again, like I alluded to in my comments before, is that the fact that we didn't find him after such an exhaustive search from members of our sheriff's office, other law enforcement agencies across the Southeast, from citizens doing this on their own, you know, each one of those came up empty. So that led us, as these plea negotiations became possible, that again, this wasn't a let's just take a plea so we can get rid of the case. It was all about finding that little boy and taking him from where he was. And at that point in time, you know, I had feelings in my heart of that it's going to be just a horrible thing, and sure enough, it was. I mean, who puts a baby under tires? And to take this plea, to exchange his resting place, it gave me much relief personally. I mean, I've put a lot of lost sleep hours into worrying about this little boy, and I certainly wasn't in any position to do something less than I thought was right. I said it before, I was the face of him, and I took that responsibility, I don't know, maybe more than I should have or what, but just to accept anything short of finding his body in a reasonable plea that you have, and if you had gone to trial, you would get somewhere close to that anyway, but to the thought of going to trial and getting a guilty verdict, that's awesome, but the thought of going to trial and getting a guilty verdict without finding that little boy, that's just missing the mark.
Did someone else have a statement that coincides with Ruben Ebron? I know that JSO and some child specialists interviewed the 5-year-old sister, and I know there's some credibility issues because of her age, because of possible trauma that she might have been exposed to. There were also other people that are kind of involved throughout that day in interacting with Ruben and Lana. I mean, did the little girl say anything about a drowning? You know, did these other people say that they knew anything about this?
We spoke to it from from the point that we could determine who they may have had contact with, either Ruben or Lana, from statements they made, technology that we may have had, any surveillance video, we spoke to everyone who they had contact with that day. That helped us put our timeline together of where he might have been. We used surveillance to know what time he bought gas, what time he went to the laundromat, what time he went to the storage unit. All those put that time frame together. Lily's cooperation. I said before that Lonzy led a tragic life and had a tragic death. She sat next to him during that tragic life and potentially sat next to him during whatever disposal was. Her cooperation or her trauma or her impact, it was such that it is in its equal tragedy that she had to do that. What she cooperated with, I mean, it wasn't anything that led us. That was our thought from early on. This should be pretty simple. You talk to this 5-year-old, you get some information that she's going to have. Maybe that'll lead us to the right spot. That didn't happen. But again, that leads back to all these ponds that we searched and square miles that we searched. All these things came up with not finding him. Again, leading us to being willing to accept that plea.
Can you give us a little time when you got out there with Mr. Ebron, and then when you actually found the remains, like how long it was? Did you go and come back? Like, I'm just not clear on that.
We never, once we got there that Sunday night, it was dark, it was cold. His efforts, although determined to find where he laid the body, the difference in 7 months in vegetation and water table changed the look of it some way. And the area that he was disposed of in, one of the adjoining neighbors had taken some dirt and pushed some dirt and trash into a larger pile. That changed the topography, and it kind of threw him off. We reached a point where we weren't getting anywhere. We're in circles, so we took him back to the jail, knowing the information that he had given us. We never left there and continued at daylight to begin that search again. It was during that daylight search, shortly thereafter, that we found the pile of tires, saw the bone sticking out, and then it unfolded from there.
Last question.
I'm sorry.
Did you doubt that he was going to find out and let you know?
Well, I doubted him every step of the way. He's a liar and was a liar. So that was an underlying factor to to myself and my team. Is this just another red herring? Is this just another story that he's thrown out? You had a question, I'm sorry.
I'm just curious from a personal standpoint, since these latest developments about what happened that night, have you all been in contact with Lonzy's other family members, like grandparents, aunts, uncles? What are they saying? What are they expressing to you all? Gratitude? Things like that.
I wouldn't expect anyone to be grateful. This is what you pay us to do as taxpayers. It is our privilege that the sheriff funds appropriate that we get to work these cases and put our hearts and souls into them. Everybody that's behind me, from Ms. Corey's office to my people that work for me, pour our heart and souls in them. We don't do it for gratitude. We do it for the victims and do it to provide answers. I hope that our efforts and our work through this case to his family members is satisfactory. And there's nothing that will ever bring that little boy back, unfortunately. But the work that both of these officers put in together to bring him home, I hope that provides them answers. Thank you all very much.
I just want to close with one thing. When people go today to render their opinions on Lonzy Barton's case, I want them to ask themselves one question. Can you even name any other baby victim of similar circumstances that we've ever had to seek justice for in this jurisdiction? And if you can't, and if you don't know the names of any of our other victims or the circumstances of the cases or the diligent investigative and prosecution efforts, should you really be rendering an opinion? We always welcome input and constructive criticism, but is it truly constructive if you don't know all of the facts and all of the law? Thank you all for being here.